I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today I'm so excited to be talking to Imogen Poots all about the chronology of water. And in starting off and talking about the way that the memoir exists, that this is based on, and the way that Kristen Stewart has directed it, it's very much a non-linear structure. It's not a traditional three act, and it's kind of this existence of bearing witness to things in the present, but also the ideas of memory. And I was just interested in how that shaped the way that you thought about stepping into this role and stepping into telling this story with Kristen in that way.
Yeah, it's always interesting, this idea of memory, because it's relatable to all of our lives, but with Lydia in particular, the cards she was dealt was so hard that in order to kind of survive that, your imagination has to be this insanely sturdy muscle, and that requires, like, obviously a fantasy life and thinking forward to the future with great hope and expectation, but also the burden of nostalgia is, like, it's bittersweet. And I think there's something to do with memory in the film that was just really interesting to both of us, where you're constantly reframing the life that you've had in order to understand it better, but also how necessary it is to sort of tell yourself the story of your life to move past it and heal from it. And all of that, I mean, we all do it all the time, but it was just really a great thing to play a part in that way, because she's processing it constantly, and we're also inconsistent. Like, we're also sort of sure and certain as to how something happened, and then a way of managing it is to understandably reframe that, and then the truth will always permeate eventually, you know? So all of that was just like a really great experiment for both of us to kind of go into with a character. She's so formidable, and she's so human, and she's so full of contradiction, and all of that speaks to, I think, like, the fragility and the kind of wonder of, like, the human imagination, you know?
And to your point as well, she's so formidable, and there's such a strength to her, even when we see everything that is being put upon her and all the things that happen to her that she doesn't have any choice or autonomy in. And we kind of see her navigate how to find more of that choice and autonomy for herself. And so, what was that like, kind of playing her and never allowing her to fall into victimhood, even if she does fall into, wrong choices or need to kind of fall down a little bit to pick herself back up again?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's hard to know at what point in life it's your responsibility for how you are the way you are. And I think there's something really courageous about a person like that, where she does take responsibility. It doesn't mean she doesn't make mistakes and she sabotages it and she sets herself up for sort of success, and then at the last minute she just can't do it. And that's the beauty of her, is I do think there's great nobility in, like, trying. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to succeed, but I think there's a real I don't even know if it's strength. I don't know what it is, and I don't think it's as simple as sort of there's a strong backbone to her. I think she's just there's a resilience that's really incredible, that certainly, like, wanes at moments. And I think it's really interesting with a character like her to explore, like, where's her power coming from exactly? Because if your power is coming from sex, and that was something which was sort of foisted upon you before you were old enough to understand it, then that's going to completely derail a normal trajectory, like, emotionally. So all of that stuff too, I think, like, her understanding of where power comes from, how it's been taken from her, how she abuses it, in her relationships with some pretty, like, decent men, aside from, addiction issues. They're decent people, and you watch her kind of destroy those things. And that's the beauty of her. So she's strong in moments, and there's that willpower, but there's also just this deep, deep fragility to Lydia.
I remember you saying that kind of in especially the first two relationships that we see in the film with Philip and Devon, that you kind of felt this sense of her testing them almost. And there's that moment where she even says, I think to Devon, you know, who could possibly love someone like me? And so it's that idea of, well, if I keep pushing you and I keep testing you, then maybe you'll prove that someone can. And so what are the ways in which you really saw her doing that in those relationships?
I think that's an interesting point, that there's kind of the person who really challenges her emotionally ultimately is Andy at the end of the film. And to that point, like, she's coming of age like everyone else, and she falls in love with Philip, and she finds Philip to be too passive. And that's because she's living her life at this sort of wattage, which this human being can't contend with or can't satisfy. And that's where Lydia is kind of like the weather. Like, she's very mercurial, and she doesn't know what she wants. And why should she know what she wants? She's figuring that out in real time. And with Devon too, that's like an enabling relationship. But all of these things also led her to sort of a deep understanding of her own emotionality and relationships. And there's no way, I don't think, that she could have written what she had unless she'd had these kind of relationships to compare the ones she had in later life too. I mean, that's right, that's the same for all of us. And she had regrets about that. And I think that's interesting. But it really wasn't until in our story, in our telling of it, is that when she meets Jim Belushi's character, Ken Kesey, and that's not a romantic relationship, thank goodness, but that is a platonic one that really, I think, that shifts something for her in a very, very deep way. And that's because sex was taken out of the equation with it. And therefore, again, the power is coming from a different sort of corner of her soul, you know?
I mean, I love what you're bringing up about the relationship with Ken Kesey, because he becomes this really pivotal male figure in her life. And yet you see little details still of the ramifications of everything that her father did to her. There's a moment where Ken Kesey puts his arm around her, and it kind of, you feel a little bit of tenseness in her body,
I
even though that's
know.
someone
Yeah.
that she trusts. And I thought that was such a powerful moment to see, I trust you, but I can't stop the way that my body responds to you. And what did you find in little details like that?
Well, yeah, you do trust people. Like, oh, you're so open to people and you want to believe people. I feel that way. I want to believe someone. I don't want to move through the world being like paranoid that someone's sort of got bad intentions. And I think that relationship is so tender and it's so important, and he takes her so seriously. But it's still, people are inconsistent and unknowable and people make mistakes. And that moment in particular, I remember that sense of, oh, don't cross that threshold and don't destroy this. But you don't know. And I think that's the relief you feel when that doesn't follow, that it purely is him saying, what do you want to write? And she talks about Faulkner and he's like, good luck. And they share something very, very precious. And I think when you see the interaction between him and her father, that's like one of my favorite things in the film as well. That's sort of like, they both, everybody in that scene feels like a child or something. Like, it's so, yeah, that really hit me. But yeah, people are like, you just hope they don't betray who they say they are, but that's a pretty steep requirement to ask of someone, I guess.
It is, and Kristen directs so much of what happens to her with her father with so much delicacy. And again, it's that idea of memory. You don't remember every single thing that was in the frame. And so she never needs to show the details of what's happening. And yet we get the essence and we have a full comprehension of it. And I was interested in how the two of you kind of work together on the framing and kind of telling that part of the story in that way.
I think it's so smart that she didn't need to show any of that for a multitude of reasons that we can all imagine. But I think that as much as it is the story of someone, you see the flashbacks and you see the way that her father and her interact with one another and how he's kind of like this omnipresent voice, and you can take it that that voice is a voice of the patriarchy. You can keep it simple and local in the sense of the abuse within the home. I think there's this theme, an idea of something being taken from you, hidden from you and how you repossess that. And of course, child abuse is the catalyst for that. There's also just being a woman in the world can most women I know have had an experience of that, and that's just sort of how we're operating in the world, and that's our kind of like method of survival. And I think that it speaks to both of those things, but the way that she's handled it is just, it's important because it's a big part of the story, but I think for Kristen it's not the only part of the story. And I think what was more interesting to us is how people react to things that have happened to them, and the choices that you make after that, and the mistakes you make, and the rerouting. And that's kind of the stuff of life. And I think that was the thing that we wanted to focus more on, without shying away from the fact that this colossal, horrific act happened for a number of years. You know?
No,
Yeah.
it's such a great point. And, even just in the way that another colossal moment for her is when she gives birth and loses her child, because again, the way that it's shot with such intimacy, you can tell that Kristen really gave you the space to just sit and live and breathe in that scene. It doesn't really cut away, it doesn't shy away. And yet again, it's framed right here and we know everything that's happening, and we never even need to see the child to kind of know that something's not okay because of everything between her and her sister. And I wanted to ask about filming that scene with, Kristen behind the camera, and also with Thora Birch as kind of your scene partner in that moment.
That, yeah, that scene for me, it's all Thora. I mean, it's like, that was the first day that Thora turned up on set. That was our first scene together. And I think it was one of the first it was one of the first scenes we shot where there was like a major character who was going to be, we were going to start our kind of chunk of work together. And looking into her eyes, like she's so present. And as an actress, she's a force, and she's just open. And I felt really safe and trusting immediately. And it was just a kismet thing that the two of us found. It chose us or something. We felt like sisters immediately. And so all I had to do was look at Thora and be with Thora. And Thora's heartbreak, Claudia's heartbreak for Lydia, breaks my heart. Like, that's watching a sibling who you're close to, knowing everything that's happened in their life, but also witnessing something like that and experiencing something like that is truly horrendous. And so being there together was the scene, and Kristen as a director in those moments. I mean, she's just, she gets it. It's probably the actress in her, but it's also just because she's an incredibly intelligent person, and she notices everything. And it's an absurd thing to do. It's a completely absurd thing to do, to give birth on camera. And I think Kristen handled it just like stunningly, and with such delicacy and also precision, which is a key factor in moments like that, where you're not just, it's not drawn out longer than it needs to be. So yeah, for me, that scene just lives between Thora and Lydia, Claudia and Lydia. But Thora was a huge part of the film for me, and a connective, like, it's molecular with an actress like her. She's just, she's quite incredible. She pulls it out of you.
And there's a moment which follows all of this where Lydia's in the water with Philip, and they're releasing the ashes into the water. And yet there's also moments of laughter. And it's that entire cross section of how closely laughter and grief live side by side as emotions in us, especially in some of the most difficult points. And what did you find in kind of playing a character where there's so much weight and so much heaviness within the story, but there's also moments like that are allowed to exist?
Yeah, I mean, that was so great. And I loved working with Earl Cave. He's also just an amazing actor, and so fun, and really, really smart and open. And that scene, I'm so happy that we had that chance to show that, because you're right, they're completely intrinsically attached. They're cousins, in terms of grief and hysteria. and the release of that and what they've gone through together as two individuals. And they're both still so young, and to go through something like that is horrendous. And then there's this sort of accidental levity, which I think, a sense of humor is, it's such a survival mechanism as well. It's such a sort of, what else do? You reach a point where it's sort of, what else? You hear about this, in parts of the world that are war-torn. It's like there's a sense of humor that prevails because it's the only way to kind of cognitively digest something. And so I think a moment like that, when it's your own emotional life and the great loss of that, it's sort of, and it's crazy. They're trying to kick a cardboard box into this, the force of the ocean. It's just, it's like, it's human futility. It's just kind of like, there's something so puny about it. And yet it's the weight of what they're experiencing is huge.
And one of the things that we see her do in how she harnesses these experiences is turn it into writing and turn it into this memoir. And there's a moment where she reads it out loud, and it's the first time that she's saying all of these words out loud and talking about that moment in a room full of other people. And again, it's so clever, just the intimacy of the camera. We don't need to see the crowd because it's a conversation that Lydia's almost having more with herself. And what was the kind of transformation and almost like that little essence of a rebirth that you found in her in that moment.
Well, yeah, there's just this immense. It's impossible to stand up in a group of people and do anything. And for her, her writing is so specific and it's very singular and it's very personal. And the excerpt that Lydia reads in that scene is incredibly vulnerable and potentially quite elusive for an audience. What she's talking about it in terms of like metaphor. And the thing that I thought was just so beautiful, and I think I said this to you the other day when we did our Q&A, is the longing to emerge as something amphibious and without gender. And that, just to sort of, that statement alone, I personally find that a stunning piece of writing, a stunning thing to say. It's so relatable. I completely understand that. And this is her experience of the world, and she figures out what she feels through her writing, and then to kind of say that in front of people is extraordinary. And it landed. That's the thing, is it did land. It doesn't necessarily mean that she then followed through on the opportunity, because she couldn't, because she's human, and that's what we do. We set ourselves up and then we can't always seal the deal. It's just like, it's too hard. And I think you see in that moment, that's what I mean with the story, is that there are moments of great hope, and you see that there's a potential for hope, but being human can really derail that.
No, I think you're so right with that. And, lastly, in just talking about the relationship that she has with Andy at the end and getting to, see her become a mother. You were talking earlier about how she kind of challenges these other relationships, but he becomes the person that challenges her the most and saying, I see you as a mother. And that's such a fearful space for her to enter into. But what did you feel like that really gave her to have someone see her so wholly and so completely?
Yeah, to me, it speaks to this idea of, you can be so projected upon as a woman. You can be so sort of like you're finished, like you're not still becoming, like you're crystallized in this way, and you better not change, you better not have more to say or more to do. And he says, I see the mother in you, because he knows her story isn't done in that sense. And he knows for her that is revisiting one of the most traumatic periods of her life. And in terms of the other men who've been sort of disassociated because of booze and drugs, or because Philip just wants to make her happy. And here's someone who's like, if you want that, I see it in you. Like there is potential still there. There is still more. And it doesn't have to remain as this one version of that there is a kind of, you don't know what kind of mother you're going to be. It's just such an incredible thing to say to someone, and so scary and so alarming. I think in that moment, it's the first time she's felt truly scared, and not because she's fucked up or made a mistake, but it's a really, it's that statement is scary as hell to her at that moment, and that's why she has to do it.
Yeah, you've done such a beautiful job with all of the kind of complexities and layers to this performance. So thank you so much for talking about it. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.